Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are getting started with today's exciting panel. Thank you all for battling the traffic and making it through parking and making it here in person. We do have quite a few attendees joining us virtually via Zoom as well. So looking towards a very engaging discussion this evening. The topic for today is leading from the bedside to the boardroom. It's an exploration of the professional journeys of some accomplished physician executives. And when I say accomplished, you'll hear a little bit more. They are truly accomplished, and I am so grateful that they've taken the time today to come and talk to us about their leadership journeys, from being a clinician to being a physician executive. So we'll start with a moderator for this evening, Dr. Stephen Williams. He is the Associate Chief Medical Officer with UTMB Clear Lake. He also serves as the Medical Director for High Value Care for UTMB Health System, Chief of Division of Urology, Director of Urologic Oncology, and Director of Urological Research at UTMB. He completed his urology residency and then did a fellowship. Residency was at Brigham and Women's Hospital, fellowship at MD Anderson, has a master's in clinical science and health services research, an MBA, a yellow belt in Lean Six Sigma, and is a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives. A fun fact, he's not all nerd. A fun fact is he is proud of multicultural influences that he has in his life. He was raised by a single mom who's from Argentina and is married to a half Japanese, half Mexican woman. So that's Dr. Williams. Thank you for moderating the panel today. Dr. Nathan Deal, he is trained as an emergency medicine physician, has held several leadership positions in emergency medicine departments before he moved into a health system role as a physician executive. He serves as the Chief Medical Officer for two of the hospitals within the HCA Gulf Coast Division. Fun fact, Dr. Deal spent time as a chef prior to a career in medicine, working on a small cruise line.
Yes.
He didn't share this until last evening. If not, we would have had to see him to cater for us today.
Yes.
Dr. Carla Braxton, she is the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Quality Officer for Houston Methodist West and Houston Methodist Continuing Care Hospitals. She's also clinically active in the intensive care unit. She completed her general surgery residency in New York and then did a fellowship in surgical critical care, has an MBA from the Columbia Business School, and she's also a fellow with the American College of Healthcare Executives. Fun fact, she earned an educational scholarship playing classical piano. So when I say these physician executives are accomplished, you can tell they are normal, regular people with lots of skills outside the great credentials that they bring to the table. Dr. Anita Yang, she is the Vice President of Ambulatory Medical Operations and Professor of Endocrine Neoplasia and Hormonal Disorders at MD Anderson Cancer Center. She did a residency in internal medicine and peds at Duke, did a fellowship in adult and ped endocrinology at Baylor College of Medicine and MD Anderson. She's also a certified executive coach or a leadership coach. Fun fact about her, before it was cool, I took a gap year before med school, and she taught English, learned Chinese, and traveled to 6 continents in Asia. And last but not least, we have Dr. Wahid. Dr. Wahid is Chief Medical Officer for HCA Houston Healthcare Southeast. He has a physician executive MBA and also a fellowship in quality and safety and an improvement advisor program with the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, IHI. He's a board member with Quality Texas Foundation, has served as a regional Baldrige examiner. Fun fact, he likes to play squash, and not too long ago took a very long hot air balloon ride in Turkey. Right? So without further ado, love to get Dr. Williams to kick off the discussion today. And Have a great evening, and we want you all to be engaged and participate. We will have time for a Q&A session after the panel discussion. So, Dr. Boyd.
Totally. And I really want to thank everyone for being with us this evening and hopefully for physician and non-physician leaders, it just provides an example of just shared collaboration. But we'll dive right in. I have some set questions that I'll ask our esteemed faculty and kind of move forward. So the first question is, why and when did you decide to make the transition into administration? Dr. Wahi.
Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. Really honored and privileged. Before I respond to this question, I want to recognize my quality team who's who are here. My VPQ, Alice. I have our quality director, Aaron, and I have our quality coordinator, Tim. It's very nice of them to travel all the way, navigating through the traffic to come and support. When and why is a good question. So I always, when I was at the bedside and got into leadership, clinical leadership early on in my career, there was always a question that would come one way or another: why do we do this? Why do we do things like these? And then the response would be, well, we've always done this way. Or somebody would say, well, this is one of our protocols. And sometimes it would fit well, and sometimes it would not. To a point where I felt that I needed to have a broader impact beyond bedside, and really felt that I needed to make an impact at a system level so I could help improve processes and improve protocols. And then during COVID, when we were stretched thin, everybody felt the heat during the COVID. A lot of vulnerabilities were exposed. And at that moment, I felt that this was my calling to lead some of the systems and some of the groups that I was part of at that time, and felt that I had more passion towards process improvement and quality. So I think pre-COVID pandemic and during pandemic was the transition point, found an opportunity and transition into that role.
Dr. Ying.
Sure. So I've been at MD Anderson for 15 years, and I decided to make this transition. It really, to me, wasn't so much a transition. When I was finishing fellowship, you're trying to get a job, and my husband, that whole last year of fellowship, is like, what are you going to do? Are you going to do research? Are you going to do clinical care? What are you going to do? And I mean, every night, and I just come home, I'm like, I don't know yet. I haven't figured it out yet. And, but it really pushed me to say, what are my interests? What are my strengths? What am I going to excite to get me up every day to go to work? And when I looked back at the various things I'd done, when I was a resident, I was a chief resident. When I was a fellow, I tried to avoid being a chief fellow, but I still ended up as a chief fellow. Like, there are just certain things that I'm drawn to, which is process improvement, trying to make the system better. And so I looked for a job opportunity that was going to be welcomed by a physician, that it wasn't going to be seen as a negative, and that I could prosper. And MD Anderson, I could tell, was a place that might value that. And my boss, who was hiring me, which I was very straightforward, I said, I'm not going to do research. I love to see patients, I'll see patients, but I really have an aspiration to be more involved at a system operational level. He's like, not enough doctors care about that. It can only help the organization if we have a doctor that cares about that. So I don't know how I'm going to mentor you, but I'll find you people, and we'll see what happens. And so I decided early on, this was how I was going to give back. And so I just took opportunities that came along, went and got my MBA after a few years being on faculty, and then have continued on that path.
All right, great. So I have another question. There's a series of questions that we have that were already pre-established. But so Dr. Braxton, this is one. What do you think is the best way to start exploring if administrative leadership opportunities may be of interest for a clinician?
So I think Angela's answer was really great, because it shows there wasn't an exact pathway. And so even your administrator, your chair or CEO who was interested in you coming on board was like, well, there's no path for this, but let's figure it out. And it was really the same for me. So for any of you who are interested in, or any physicians that you work with in your leadership position that are interested in additional administrative positions or leadership positions, I think of them in terms as leadership positions that you can get your feet wet in. There's never a reason that you have to do all or none, where you have to abandon all of your residency and fellowship training and all those years and years that you put into, and now you got to completely like cut and transition to something completely administrative. As a physician leader, you can learn those leadership skills where you are, where you're planted. And there are so many opportunities from that standpoint. You can become a medical director in your area of specialty. You can become a section chief or department chair, or, any of these other areas you can, or, medical directors of your, I don't know, endoscopy suite or your GI service line or whatever. I mean, there's so many opportunities where physicians can lead. It's a matter of developing your leadership skills, maybe depending on certain high stakes situations, getting an executive coach to coach you and help grow your leadership toolbox and capabilities, being with an organization that's already aligned with your goals so that they embrace physician leaders. And it's okay to use the skill sets that you've already grown over the years. They're actually enough. It's just a matter of maybe adding to or augmenting those skill sets so that you can lead a larger group of people, think more strategically, think about how you can align what your, service line. If you're a neurosciences service line, you might be in charge of neurology and neurosurgery. It's neurosciences. Okay, what are the strategic goals of the organization in the neurosciences arena? And what are the goals of the clinicians that are the actual practitioners or frontline staff of neurosciences, the physician, the neurologists and the neurosurgeons and the staff leadership? Start to lead from where you are, find those opportunities where you are, and you don't have to make a big switch like some of us have. You really can become a very strong, valued physician leader within the organization and maintain your clinical role, your clinical goals from that standpoint. So I would encourage everyone, just grow where you're planted.
And I love what you mentioned as well, because one thing I found, being a physician, we go through medical school, residency, training, we're afforded opportunities, but very seldom do we have structured leadership courses, even leading in general, knowing what that word means. More often people are promoted, and I know perhaps in the room and online, the Peter principle, people are promoted in a position until they fail because you published a lot of papers, you got some grants, suddenly now you're the chairperson, of whatever department, but doesn't make that justified as it is in other industries where there's formal training and structures and opportunities. And one way or another, we are leaders indirectly coming out, but don't prepared or have that skill set, but you can act on that. And I think ACHE provides those opportunities. Dr. Deal, I'd love to hear from you what you have.
Yeah, so when I graduated residency, my intent was to practice clinically and maybe teach some residents and fellows. And so I originally did not have a burning desire or a plan to engage in administrative leadership. And so a lot of what drove me to the position that I am now is just the opportunities that presented themselves around me. Initially, it was finding little efficiencies that we could address within the emergency department, helping out in operations work. And then more and more what you'll find is that because our hospital and health systems are so complicated, many of us are just asking for people to be involved in committees, on task forces, whatever it is. And the more you say yes to those kinds of things, the more you get exposed to the complexity of the health system, but it also challenges you to grow and to learn about all the other aspects beyond just what your comfort zone is. And so I found myself serving on committees in the hospital, even though it was not within the domain of emergency medicine. And I realized, one, while there's a lot of healthcare out there that I don't understand or know very much about, but also finding that I had a real passion for it. I enjoyed very much the work that we were doing and realized that it afforded me the opportunity to impact in a much broader and greater way. So for me, there's very little that provided as much satisfaction of being able to help a patient in front of you. But at the same time, knowing that when you change policy or when you're able to modify the manner in which we address central line infections or operate the OR in a more effective way, that could impact not just the one patient in front of you, but the thousands of patients that are coming through, then that provides a satisfaction in a very different way. And so the more and more I got into it, the more and more I realized how much I loved it. And so then I found myself seeking out those opportunities. I think that's how a lot of us get into this kind of work. And so expose yourself to the small things like you were mentioning, what the things that are around you. And if you find that passion, then just keep saying yes to as many options that come along, because those opportunities are around. The more you do, the more you learn, and hopefully the more joy you find in it.
It kind of like making a great souffle.
Exactly right.
I had to throw that in.
Yes, yes.
But anyway, so we'll move to the next question. So why do you think having clinicians in leadership is important? And how can physician leaders improve healthcare overall? Dr. Wahid.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question. I want to take a moment to acknowledge my CEO, who's here to support me. Yasmin McDaniel. I have a very supportive team here today. So I think this is a great question. You know, we physicians really before we delve into leadership, are really leaders at the bedside. We're calling the shot and making decisions, critical decisions, sometimes decisions that determine a patient's progress through the journey in the hospital. And so that itself is a wealth of knowledge that only a frontline worker can have. So I think that information, when it's brought back into the boardroom, is critical, because you have an insight, of those processes, and it's also bridges the gap between what happens at the bedside for clinical care and the policymakers, the decision makers. Also, you can also inculcate evidence-based practices because of your presence in that space, and I think it also helps medical staff understand the rationale behind certain policies and protocols, and you're able to make a difference in explaining the why to the teams, and that helps with alignment and engagement, satisfaction. So I think it's critical to have physicians in this role always have a seat on the table.
Dr. Yang.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think that medicine is so collaborative and you need all the different voices. And I find that most of us in these roles are usually a translator between multiple sides. And I think as physicians, we are trained in taking a lot of different information, coming at us from different ways, a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there, what the patient told me, and then trying to put it all together into a diagnosis and a plan. And that's really applicable to a lot of what we do that's not at the bedside. At the same time, I think there are parts about being a physician that make us not good leaders. And I think we have to be aware of that as physicians. And when we go into that role, we might be trained in a hierarchical way, in that, like, I make the ultimate decision. And that's really not necessarily the way to lead. We may be just used to thinking that we know the right answer. Like, we see all this, okay, I got it figured out. I know this is what we should do, rather than taking a pause, making sure you've gotten feedback from appropriate stakeholders, and somebody else might actually have a better idea. So I think there are parts that sometimes we might be trained in a particular way that we've got to break those habits when we get into leadership roles.
Well, I agree with that. I think that some of what we do can make us very good leaders, and some of these things that we know to do can handicap us a little bit. I was in surgery for 1,000 years, and command and control is the way to go. Like, that is the only way. You have to lead the team they're looking to you for answers. As a physician, people bring you problems and then they don't want to hear from you. So what do you think we should do? They don't want that. They came to you with the issue and the answer is give 20 milliequivalents of potassium. I mean, that's the only answer. They're just waiting for you to say it, you know, whatever. So I think what we had to learn as physician leaders is that we had to learn, you know, we have to learn to seek to understand a lot more before making certain decisions. You do need to be timely and, you know, you can't take a long time to decide, but you certainly do need to have lots of inputs and recognize that you might not be the smartest person in the room or the best knower of that particular challenge that's in front of you. And you might need to reach out to people who are the best knowers of whatever that is and make sure that you surround yourself with people who are experts and who can give you better insights. So you can make better decisions, more decisions.
And I think as a urologist, I always tend to get more consults, kind of like our orthopedic colleagues. So I think just by nature of my training indirectly, I've always been collaborative, you know, in nature. And that kind of dovetails into the leadership positions and reaching out and more importantly, coming together, going to the front line, understanding, you know, what the issues and having people come, you know, with the solutions. And I think with all of our roles, you know, that's what we try to emulate, you know, in our organizations. That historically don't come up problems, but opportunities and then potential solutions. And I think it's always a win-win when the front line is providing those solutions. So that's a great segue into the next question. And then Dr. Deal, is an MBA or additional education important for this transition into leadership?
I think in many ways, it can help many of us that began our careers in the clinical space. And you heard before about the importance of us being translators in many ways, of as clinician leaders being that voice between our staff that are primary clinical in nature and the rest of the administrative staff. If you think about how we spend most of the first few years of our training, it's about learning the language that we're going to communicate with each other. And so the words that we use as physicians with each other are very different than the words that our patients use when they're describing the exact same thing. And so a lot of what we do in medical education is just vocabulary and making sure that we're using the same language. Well, in much the same way, all of our accounting and CFO friends did the exact same thing, but they learned a different language. And so the language that they learned in school and the language that they're using all the time is different than the language that we use. And so there's a lot of times where we may be trying, I say we collectively, clinical leaders and accountants and CFO friends may be driving at the same goal, but we're talking past each other because we're not using the same language. And so I've found that by learning as much as I can about finance, about accounting, et cetera, I learned a language that will resonate with my other partners. And that by itself has been invaluable in my collaboration with colleagues. The other piece that I would say to that is understanding the lens with which they see the challenges that they're presented. So in much the same way that we think about how we approach clinical challenges, I know that there is a lens through which I'm approaching clinical issues, but that's not the same vantage point that other people in the executive suite are approaching those problems. And so whether it be an MHA or an MBA or some other kind of degree where you're sitting alongside other leaders and understanding their perspectives can be absolutely critical in being not just a valued member of a team, but also a leader of those teams and seeing how their vantage points are influencing their decisions. So I think it's a great idea. If you have the time and the resources to do it, I would absolutely recommend pursuing additional training.
I think it is important and it may be, in my mind, it's probably critical that if a physician is interested in leadership, where you're going to have interface with, you know, the CEOs, the COOs, the CFOs, that you learn this language to be more successful. I mean, you can do leadership at that level without MBA, but it is like, you know, I find myself sometimes Googling, in the boardroom, trying to figure out, you know, what the language means, what this metric means and stuff. So I think you'll be more successful if you have the skill set and if you're prepared and if there's there's direction that you're taking, you're intentional about it, you invest your time, learn the language, learn the skill sets, the tools, because very early on, as you take on this role, you will develop your reputation. So if you are talking sense, and if you're helping the process improvement, and if you're speaking the same language, they understand you, you understand them, there are no interpreters in between, then I think it's a collaboration that really produce results, and everybody's talking the same thing and moving in the same direction. I also feel that many organizations actually ask for credentials now. So I don't really find recently any growth opportunities unless somebody has really been in an organization for several years and has, people know that individual very well. I find that many organizations actually now ask for the credentials, the MBA, the MHA, before they even open your application. So in my mind, if you are at a point where you want to start this journey and you have a few years to figure out, this is a good time to sign up to a program that gives you a good work-life balance. Many programs are offered remotely, but I think it would be critical in being a successful leader that can make a big impact early on.
Yeah, and then I'll openly admit, I thought obtaining, an MBA or MHA would be garnish more financial literacy and accounting, and I knew there would be some leadership components, but actually the bulk of it is leadership. At least I found, and I know there's different programs, but I think holistically in the ACHE, and not only understanding the language, but really changing myself, and my thoughts and how I'm able to have conversations in a similar dialogue. But Dr. Ying, we were talking before, and don't want to steal your thunder, but what are your
No,
thoughts?
that's okay. I mean, I think I agree with the speakers so far that now many positions that are higher level, they're looking for it. So, but I would say that maybe you're not going for that high of a position, and it's okay to look at executive education. Maybe you just want to really understand finance. Maybe you just want to really appreciate marketing or strategy. There are courses like that people can take. And then I also want to, I think we are all students of leadership, meaning that I'm constantly taking courses on leadership or attending a workshop. MD Anderson has a leadership institute. I got my certificate in coaching from Coach Rice, because being a better leader is actually what you learn from when you're trying to learn to be an executive coach. So I think that is a constant learning. Just like as a physician, you continuously get CME credits to keep up with your field. If you were a leader, you should be continuously getting, attending leadership courses to improve your leadership skills. I think it's the same thing.
So I thought that I was gonna go the physician scientist route when I was in residency and going into fellowship. But I'd always had an interest in healthcare economics. I just couldn't fit it or economics. I couldn't fit it in pre-med, biology, chemistry, double major. I took extra classes and summer courses and winter mini semester courses just so that I could take one class in economics, because there was no way that it was accommodating in my biology, chemistry, double major. It just didn't exist. Like, no one even accounted for the fact that maybe you want to learn something else with those majors. And so I knew that I would have to just go straight down the line of the known path, which was pre-med, medical school, residency, fellowship, couple years of research. You can get a better CV, get a better fellowship. And so I already knew I had to do that because that's the path that was already laid out. And it wasn't until I was in fellowship that I finally saw the possibility to go to business school and to exercise that, scratch that itch and to exercise that desire to understand the finance side of medicine, the business side of medicine better. And I had to send myself to business school, but it was because I knew that I wanted to incorporate this into my career. I knew that I'd be practicing clinically for a long time, but I knew also that at some point, since there was no path, but at some point I would pivot to do more administration and have more administrative responsibilities at some point. but there was no way to know when and what the opportunities would look like. They didn't have names at that time and all of that. So I thought that it would be better coming in the door that I would have an MBA. And actually, it allowed me to have administrative responsibilities earlier in my career, like relatively early out of fellowship. I went to business school and I was the medical director of the ICU in my first real job, you know, because they're like, oh, you finished business school, you must be committed to understanding the larger decisions, the strategic decisions that we have to make as an organization. You'll be great in this role because you need to be able to think strategically and understand business and finance and all this other stuff to be in the meetings and know what we're talking about. I was like, great, I'm your girl. And so, you know, it started early for me, but it was because I was committed to eventually being in this role. I do encourage, I think we need a critical mass of physician leaders at every organization that don't have to have their MBAs. You just need to understand strategy. You need to understand how to align with your administration. You need to understand some basic leadership principles and have that toolkit. Get a little coaching, and then lead, because I think that just having one physician leader in the room of executives is not enough. It's not enough representation. And among physician leaders in healthcare, that level of representation matters a lot, that we should have physician leaders in every level of the organization and multiple departments able to align with administration and help set strategy for the organization. I believe in that deeply. Train your physician leaders.
This leads us into our follow-up question is, how do you balance academic, clinical, plus or minus research with pursuing administrative positions? And then is protective admin time really protected? And how do you secure such time if it exists? So it's kind of a loaded question there.
There's a lot there, but yeah,
You're the deal.
You didn't mention
So-
RVUs and that.
yes.
And the
We may
RV
ask the CEO to step out while Dr. Wahid answers this.
Where I would start is to say, no, protected time is not protected. Or not in the same way that maybe we would hope it to be. If you are working in an academic center or have worked in an academic center, then whatever the time allocation is for those academics is always underestimated for how much time it actually takes to do. So I remember when I was an academic faculty member at Baylor, we would have some time set aside for us to read articles and prepare journal clubs, prepare lectures. And that time was always less than what it actually took to provide a meaningful, good lecture to your residents or to your students. But that's true throughout academic medicine. That's not just specific to Baylor, that's true everywhere. And that's also true when it comes to leadership. The amount of time that you think it's going to take to lead well is always longer than you think it's going to be. Now, there are ways to shortcut that, but that's never going to be effective, and those kinds of things will catch up with you in the end. And so perhaps the right takeaway there is to say, to do jobs well, whether they be academic or clinical or leadership, it always takes an investment of time in a way that is meaningful and can be overwhelming at times. And I think that's important for all of us in this space to realize. I know for myself, and perhaps many of us on this panel, and I'm sure many of you have found yourself in the same way, committing more and more and more of yourself to whatever your pursuits are, whether they be school, whether they be leadership, clinical journeys, et cetera, and then finding less and less time for yourself. And I would just caution you of saying, how do you find that balance? Always be cognizant of that, always be aware of that, because there's never going to be enough time in the day to do all the things you wish there were. And it's very easy to miss out on the opportunity to care for yourself, for your loved ones. That's always a challenge that many of us face in these kinds of jobs. So be thoughtful about that. Find ways to balance it. Make sure you're taking time for yourself, because many of us in this room are very passionate and are very driven to achieve all sorts of different things. Make sure that you take time for yourself, take time for your loved ones, and find that balance, because that's going to be important for the longevity of your career.
And I think I had a great mentor at one point, you know, said, Steve, you protect your time. What's on paper is just an allotment. So really being diligent, you know, being a surgeon, you know, going back to research time when I did have more time dedicated to that, was not taking that case that I really wanted to do that I think, and then allowing my other colleagues to do it, which in turn helped build their careers as well. And then I was able to focus and dedicate that time. So learning the art of saying no appropriately, but then not no, but giving someone else also to an opportunity to help build their careers, whichever way that be, clinically, academic, research. Dr. Waheed, I know in your position, we had a discussion, and at HCA, you have 100% administrative time. How, I guess, in that unique aspect and with this question, what are your thoughts?
You know, I think whether it is a protective administrative time or whether it is 100% administrative time, I think you need to approach it in a smart way. Most of us have teams, and many a times we try to take too much in our plates, which can be overwhelming, whether it's 100% or whether it is protective time. So I think as a leader, this is a task that you have to grow your teams, to delegate tasks, to prioritize what is important for you to lead as a leader, and what you can delegate to a team member and let them grow, let them delve into that space, let them get the recognition, because those are your secondary leaders. I'm a firm believer of a work-life balance, and I'm a firm believer of not being a micromanager and growing my teams and delegating tasks. So I think it can be overwhelming if you are just clinging on to everything and, you know, be the Superman, which you're not because you're a human being. But I think it's always a good idea to divide your tasks and work, see what's most important, and help improve your teams, and then find those opportunities to celebrate, which will improve your team bonding, positive culture, and at the end of the day, the job gets done.
Right. We're approaching our final question. Can you believe it? Time flies. But Dr. Ying, would you do this again in pursuing a leadership position or in the leadership path? And what advice do you have now that you didn't have necessarily when you started, but you wish you did?
Well, I would definitely do this again. I love what I do. I feel so blessed that I've been given the opportunities that I had. I feel like I get to have a big impact. I mean, one of the greatest joys I have is if I'm in the faculty lounge or around where our clinics and I hear somebody talk about positively, oh, did you notice this change? Like this has happened and it's better. And they have no idea that I was behind orchestrating that change. But they are like, it's water cooler for them and they're just super excited about that. And that makes me feel so happy that something that we've worked on has gotten down to the front line and they feel ease in what they're doing. So I definitely would do this again. I think if I think about certain pieces of advice I've gotten throughout, and one of the pieces of advice when I went to an early mentor, this is 15 years ago, and said, do you think I need to go get an MBA? I was planning to do it. And the person was like, well, I didn't get it. Look at where I am. And, you know, and I truly respect the person, but sometimes you have to, okay, understand where they're coming from, but it doesn't mean you have to take their advice if you might think otherwise. And so I think that I've always, don't underestimate how important it is. Networking is one way to say it, but really just meeting with people, hearing their stories. You learn something from every little person that you might talk to. And I still remember I reaching out to a physician who was the head of an insurance program at Harvard. Because I just was curious, what would make a doctor go into that? What is she interested in? And I still remember, this is like 15 years ago, the few nuggets that I took away from that conversation. So I think find opportunities to talk with people. I would be afraid to maybe call someone and set up an appointment, but they always want to talk. And so I pay it forward now. If anybody reaches out to me at the organization and they want to just talk about the career potential, I'm happy to talk with them about that. I'll find time, carve it out. So I think take those opportunities. People want to talk about what they've done with their life and share their life experiences.
Rex?
So would I do it again? Yes. Would I do it the same way?
Didn't need that double major.
Would I do it the same way? I don't know. But I think I, it's just like a lot of the decisions we make in life. You do the best you can with the information you have in the moment. And so all of us have very different journeys, and so do you. And so in your unique journey, do the best you have with do the best you can with the information you have at the time. And so I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've received, and I think it was very broadly shared with one of my early chairs in surgery would always say, it doesn't pay to be too smart. And what he was trying to say when he said that is that you should seek other opinions, find out who knows more than you about that particular thing, and see if you can learn from them, no matter what level they are at within your team, within the organization. If you're in the operating room, it doesn't matter what level they're at in the OR. If the medical student notices that you're about to cut across the aorta, you better recognize that they see something you don't see and pause for a second. So you can learn something from anyone within the organization, especially when they come to work every day to do a good job. They're committed, and you're acknowledging them by listening to them and seeking their opinion, especially when it comes to making big changes in the organization that are going to impact people's workflow. The best thing you can do is ask the people who are the doers of that work, what's the most important to them in their workflow? What would they like to see that's better? What would they like to see as they interface between departments within the organization, and figure out what the best steps are, using the expertise of the people that are the doers of the work who are committed to excellence within your organization. So that's what I've learned.
As to whether I would do it again, absolutely. It's been an incredible journey, and I've learned a lot and had a lot of fun doing it. The advice that I would give to myself is to enjoy the journey as much as you can. The story you were telling was very familiar of, right, I got to go to college, right? And I've got to do well so that I can go to medical school. And I got to do well there so I can go and get the residency I want to, and then the fellowship and the board certification. And it all felt like it was very linear and driving to an end. But the truth is that whatever role you're in now, or whatever role you are working to get in, won't be your last role. And when you get there, you might find yourself looking for the next one and the next one and the next one, instead of pausing and enjoying and taking note of where you are in that moment. Because wherever you are making an impact in patients and colleagues around you now. Find value in that, enjoy that, because there's a lot to enjoy in that. And the more you enjoy it, the better you're going to do in it, and you will find that new opportunities will present themselves for you. So my advice to my younger self would have been, enjoy the journey.
Enjoy building others' journeys, so along the way, and really take the time to appreciate that, and it fills your heart as much as when you're trying to achieve whatever goal that you have. And more often than not, the goal that you're shooting for isn't always exactly what you thought. Where you end up is where you're supposed to be. So with that being said, I think we've completed the questions, but I know we have a very ambitious audience. We want to open it up both here, but also too online. If anyone has any particular questions, it's an open forum and your opportunity to really tap into this intellectual capital on stage. Yes.
Thank you so much for being so accessible. You were very important, very, very knowledgeable. And I guess like everything that you said is a fact, in our journey. How do you cope with resistance? Resistance from the colleagues, from the people around you, from people you're working with, because the first thing they do when you say, "Oh, I'm going to do an MBA," Like, you're a clinician, you're trying to be a clinician, why an MBA? Why an MHA? I mean, that is somewhat, not confusing because you have your goal, but it's hard. How do you do that? Because I'm at that early stage point. I finished a couple of masters, I'm ready to keep moving, but still that resistance in the environment exists.
Resistance in the environment. So I think, first of all, we all as people pursuing leadership need to have self-belief, right? So it doesn't matter what the world says. If you want to achieve something and you have self-belief, then you work towards that goal. The other thing is, I think the way we operate, the way we are within our teams, the energy, the passion, the compassion that we're showing to them day to day really goes a long way softening that resistance. So when they see, a nice physician that is always smiling, taking care of people, remembering their birthdays, celebrating, really presenting, yourself as a servant leader, but with an ambition to lead, then they come to a conclusion that, among the cohort of people I have, he is one of the best, right? In terms of mannerism and all that. So sometimes in that scenario, the opportunity presents itself to you to say, hey, we have an MBA program, you're a best fit, great personality, team player, we want you to be on board. But if you have, and sometimes as leaders, physician leaders, because we make our decisions and we are, because of the training that we go through, we become in a way a little rigid, sometimes not having an insight at how rigid we have become throughout our training and stuff. We can reflect in a way that people will find you not a good leader or a leader at a certain level, but not beyond. And that's when you could feel potential resistance. So long story short, I think leadership, one of the components of leadership is team building. The inner niceness that you have, you need to express it. And once you have your team members liking you and seeing the leader in you, then you will see that the resistance will go.
Thank you.
So my question was similar. I thought he was hitting on it, but it was close. So it didn't have to do with resistance. We're here talking about the clinician to the boardroom. What about going back the other way? Now that you're in a boardroom and you're setting up these strategies based on best practices, and you have to promote that to your physician colleagues, what kind of pushback are you getting and how do you deal with that? And does that, any of the good positives that you find working with the other physicians on this?
Good question. He's from Southeast. It's
Never rephrase.
I guess this is change enablement, is basically what you're saying, right? It could be, it doesn't matter if it's physicians, nurses, any change that's happening. I think you've heard people say you have to, whatever change is coming or whatever changes are planned, the frontline people that are most impacted have to be involved. Because then it never should be I as a leader am selling anything, right? It should be that it's obvious to everybody and the people that were part of creating it, it affects them and they're the ones that helped decide what's going to happen. Doesn't mean that it's by consensus of decisions or by consensus, but there are definitely parts of so many decisions that really it's the frontline needs to decide and you're just creating the boundaries within which it should happen, but they figure it out. As an example, right now, I'm sure every hospital is trying to get discharges on time and decrease length of stay. That's like everybody's trying to do it. And we cannot get people discharged before noon. And we did some math and we're like, if we could just maybe increase to just have 50% of the people discharged before noon. Like, that's okay. And we just handed it to the local area and said, what would it take for you just to be able to discharge 50%? Not everybody, just 50% of the people. And they sat around and they're like, okay, well, that's a more doable goal rather than the 100% that it felt like you were trying to ask. And then let's figure out what it is. And they've come up with many beautiful things that we hope to present at ACHE next year when it's in Houston. But just, it was creating some guardrails, but then really having the local people and then they are owning it.
That makes sense. I heard a lot earlier too about committees and working with the others, and that I think is, there's no other way around that. I mean, that's a must. So yeah, very good. Thank you.
I think early on, in my time as CQO and now added CMO, I felt like I was the only physician in the room when it came to certain executive level committees or councils and I could look around and go, well, how are we making decisions on behalf of the physicians? And I'm the first one in this room, so that means that there were maybe no other physicians in the room before me. And I learned that, that often, CEOs and folks in other leadership positions, CEOs will seek out physician leaders in different areas and talk to them, but the meeting still will happen without a physician in the room. I think that's why I'm such a strong proponent of physicians developing leadership skills as they are actively practicing and still going to pursue like this 50-year career in clinical practice. Fine, develop some leadership skills too, so that you can be in the room when some of these decisions are being made on executive levels or on higher levels, or so that you can align with your administration in productive ways. So that like we physicians are like, we love to be, have veto power, but then not really have any ideas to make things better that would include a lot of people besides our own personal interests. Well, I need 5 more MAs and 20 more NPs of my own, and I need 5 PAs and it's all me. But that's how the administration can see us if we don't have any other way to communicate. And if we're not really thinking about what's for the best for the organization or for the department or the section or some larger thing than just yourself. And so I do think that it's not leading by committee or managing by committee, but it certainly does require lots of physician leaders at various levels of the organization, providing input, guidance, frontline experience, helping with decision-making, learning about strategy.
I could add one other thing. I was just thinking about as I was listening to you. I think most of the time when change is happening, you're not, like I was saying, you're not the one that's saying it all, it's all the people around. And so I find the higher and higher I got up to the organization, the more and more I needed to sometimes just call someone and just say, hey, I'm hearing this, what's going on? Where do you think the issue is? Okay, can you help us in this way? And another leader, call another leader. And my job is to provide that air cover so that the teams can do their work. And then those leaders are then out there passing the message on. So it's a lot of managing messaging as you get higher up in the organization. It's not to say like you're trying to silence people. It's not at all. It's just that if you don't help give them the few words of the why, then when they're talking to their colleague, they don't have that to just spit out. So you need to help provide those nuggets and those little talking points to people and have them understand it so that it just flows naturally. So that's where sometimes I feel that that's where my role comes in.
Yeah, they often get the what and how, but they don't always get
The
why.
why. Oh, yeah, the why is really critical.
By clarification and reinforcing clarification. You can never over clarify. And then communication, I think is so key, especially with change.
You have a question back there?
Yeah, and sorry, I'm wearing my sunglasses. I needed to see. I left my glasses in the car. So this is a very interesting and important topic. I have had major issue with, and no offense, MBAs making the decision for clinicians. So what are some of the challenges that you have faced as a clinician coming into an MBA space when it comes to decisions that need to be made pertaining, as you mentioned, pertaining to the physician or any just patient care in general? What are some of the challenges?
It's a great question, and I think different people have in their journeys different experiences. I've been a very hardcore clinician all my life. I would, when I was on the, practicing by the bedside, I would be a patient advocate and really emphasize on patient experience and quality of care and all that. But when I did my MBA, that was a life-changing experience because I realized when I learned, different process improvement tools and skills, the Lean Six Sigma exposure, and the other tools that we learning the language and all that. I realized that all these years that I was working hard, I wasn't working smart because there's a lot of waste in healthcare. There's a lot of duplication. There's a lot of things that we can only understand if we have that exposure or if you have the lens to see it in a different way. So being a clinician, when I went into MBA, I got exposed to Baldrige recognition program. After my MBA, during my MBA, I got exposed to IHI. I've never heard about IHI. So that led me to do an IHI fellowship, that led me to engage in Baldrige program, learn a lot from that experience. So I think for me, MBA was really a life-changing experience. And the only regret I have in this entire journey is that I should have done it earlier to be able to really help out my physician colleagues that have the same struggles. So yes, it's hard if you have somebody in the room with an MBA making decisions for yourself, but that's why you have this path to that room where you can be a clinician, you can have a business side of healthcare incorporated into leadership, and you can present that product to the board yourself.
I might add, not everybody's going to be able to go get an MBA, and maybe, you just, the level with which you need to negotiate might be at a different level than, we're talking about the boardroom. I had someone explain this to me one time. I think the goal is I'm here, sitting here, and you might envision the person's there sitting across from me, and you're looking at the problem and you're trying to solve this problem, and you have a way to look at it and they have a way to look at it. You're not getting here. You need to envision yourself both on the same side of the table. You're both on the same side of the table, both of you looking at the problem together. And what does it take to make that happen? It might take, I find sometimes physicians only have one way to explain something, and that's explaining it the same way isn't gonna get you anywhere. You have to understand what's the other person looking, how are they looking at it? What are they trying to explain, and then help navigate together and have that openness. And so I think, how do we sit on the same side, looking at the same problem, trying to solve the same thing together?
I like the concept of explaining it the same way, just louder.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's also, I think, the cone and the cube phenomenon, right? Just appreciating everyone's different view. And I think that comes with time, and listening, understanding, and then coming up with even a better solution than whether or not you thought yours was superior at the onset. So I think that's an evolution, something that I've actually really enjoyed. The more education and titles I get, the more I realize the less I know. But I've learned know where to go and how to garnish that additional information, knowledge, and then really coming up with some beautiful solutions. Matali, do we have anything online or?
No, I've been watching. We don't have any questions or comments. I do have a question. Obviously, it takes long hours and a lot of dedication for each one of you in your roles in the different hats that you wear. Anyone want to share any leadership aha moments where you felt that you were really, probably one of your most impactful contributions as a physician leader, either in your current role or previous role, where it was all worth it in the end, where you look at it and say, yes, all that blood, sweat, and tears, and this is a feather either in my cap or for the organization or what have you. Anyone want to share any success stories?
I have one aha, and that was, and this is recency bias, but there was a physician who was trying to solve a problem. One of our surgery colleagues had this issue, and he was like, "This is the way that we need to solve this problem." And our chief of surgery was on board with that guy. Yeah, this is the way we're going to solve this problem. And then Then I took them aside and pulled together like the section chiefs of the different specialties who all interface with that particular problem. And once he's very open to like listening. And once he heard, okay, here are the constraints of ED. And then here are the constraints of our hospitalists. And here are the constraints of the surgeons and how are we gonna, he heard all of that and took a beat and started thinking about, okay, how can we solve this? Including everyone's constraints as part of the, being aware and considerate of everyone's constraints as being part of the solution. Brought a tear to my eye. I could have cried in that moment. It was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we want the physician leaders to be able to do. And at some point, as you grow your physician leaders within your organization, they begin to solve the problems themselves. They don't run to administration to solve the problems for them. They have the skill sets and the tools to solve their own issues. I mean, that was heartwarming. I saw puppies and rainbows and, you know, unicorns and stuff with that situation. And it's, you've got to develop your physician leaders across the organization so that because it's far reaching. You can't just solve all the problems in the executive suite. You have to empower people with the capability to problem solve in the way that meets the organizational culture and all those other things, but give them those skills to solve those issues, and they will if they're given the skills to do it.
Questions?
So we've heard a lot of about skill development and education and all that. If anyone is thinking about following and becoming a physician leader, what kind of attributes should they look inside themselves? Like you talked about, have your inner niceness. Clearly, people need to be happy learners and all that kind of stuff. But what other kind of qualities where you could say that person was born to do this?
Curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was this will be my inner nerd coming out for a minute, but I think it was in the 70s or maybe 60s, there was a lot of research in psychology with the intent to say, you know, there must be some kind of set quality, some personality characteristics that define a good leader. And if we could just figure out what those were, then we could just, find those persons and say, you're going to be the leader, and then life would be great. And after decades of research, what we found is there aren't any. There is no set attribute, trait, skill set, characteristics, personality that makes someone a great leader. And we can think about great leaders that we've been exposed to and find out that their style, their approach could be very, very different, but they could also be quite effective. And so now a lot of the thought when it comes to psychology is thinking about not what are the skill sets you must have, but what are the personality traits that you already have within yourself today? And how do we leverage those talents you come to the room with today to be great at what you do? And that goes back to what we discussed before about great leadership begins with knowing yourself, knowing about what your own strengths are, what your own weaknesses are, what your own penchants are. I know what my own stress behaviors are, and that's really helpful for me because then in my workplace, I can find trusted friends and say, this is what I look like when I'm stressed. Can you help me? When you start seeing these kind of behaviors from me, can you come up and say, hey, Nate, you're starting to seem stressed. Let's get back to the right place. Or what are some things that you're exceptionally good at? And how can you lend those talents to a team to have a great team together? Or what are some of the things that you're just not inherently good at? And seek those skills out in the rest of your team so you don't find people that are just the same as you, but complement you. So that would be my advice in how do you approach that leadership development? How do you become a great leader? It's about starting off and knowing yourself, building on the strengths that you have, and seeking out colleagues that you're passionate to work alongside of that complement your skill sets.
Now we had a question there, and then we'll come to you. Pam?
Well, thank you for your leadership because we can't do it without the physicians in today's world. So very much appreciated. My question is, each of y'all hire in new physicians each year. How should we be bringing those physicians in? And what kind of things telling them about leadership and about administration and, preconceived ideas come out. At University of Houston Clear Lake, we're doing some teaching with our residents and fellows. And, even at that stage, I hear back from them administration, right? So, and they've not even experienced the overall. So what would y'all say to them as new physicians coming into your organization? What's important and how do you work here?
I think it's an opportunity, because many times we find that we don't have a good onboarding process for physicians. Organizations have their values, missions, and they have their culture, they have their priorities, and they have their processes. So many times onboarding means the physician comes in, gets a badge, gets trained into the EMR. But how do we behave as physician leaders in the units? What is meaningful to this organization? How do we build our culture? What is the direction of this organization? What is the vision, mission, and values? How do we live by those values on a daily basis? What do we do on crisis situation? What do we do when we have, for instance, a colleague that is disruptive? How do we navigate that? So if I were to design this, which hopefully I will, in the best organization, which is HCA Southeast, I will have at least a 6-hour or 8-hour or 2-day session where we could actually impact those areas. We should have a clinical documentation session for physicians. How does clinical documentation translates into telling your story, which tells the administrators and everyone else how sick your patients are? Physicians still struggle with this idea, right? Everybody wants to go and write pneumonia, but it makes a difference when you write pneumonia versus complicated pneumonia secondary to, the organism, that kind of thing. So I think it's an opportunity, and I think organizations should really invest time to onboard their providers and really delve deep into the culture. If my CEO grants me some money, I would take them to a nice hotel, keep them there for maybe half a day. And
Thank you for laughing at that.
Situation, and I also get a no, so I will still try.
I think it's important, because, very soon you're going to be going to them and asking them about early discharges or length of stay or CMI, but assuming that they know all that. But I can tell you, 90% of physicians do not know what this means. And when you keep bugging them, they would say, hey, administration is pushing me to do something, which I'm here for patient care, right? So I think that's a huge opportunity. And thank you for bringing this great question. And I think, we have an opportunity in improving this process.
And I think that's something that our organization, I'm sure all of ours, one component on onboarding is also the opportunity to be involved, engaged in Leadership Institute and programs right at the onset. So offering that as tools, because one thing's in general, middle managers or, physicians, as we're speaking to, are ill-equipped, with those skills. So offering them that opportunity right at the get-go, buddy system onboarding, and then in addition, not just one buddy system, but a group of physician leaders that are already pre-existent to help stimulate, that kind of knowledge and reinforcing, the additional tools that they have. And I think that's a critical time, when they're joining an organization.
So we have time for one more question. I know we have 2 people. So you want to do a fist fight?
We got doctors.
And maybe we'll be able to fit you in. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts and your experiences. As someone who has been in a very clinically driven, going from med school, residency, fellowship, straight program, I found that it's very challenging to kind of break your way through and to kind of have your voice heard, especially in situations where there may be already a lot of senior people who are getting into more administrative roles. So what advice would you have to start to break through that and how to navigate a situation like that?
I would suggest, I think it's been spoken before, I can't remember who said it, about finding small opportunities to serve on a committee or something, or having, letting a senior person know of an interest so they can think, oh, instead of me, which they typically come ask, I'm going to suggest that you talk to her. That's actually how I got on one of my first major institutional committees is my chair, who was an advocate for me, set up a meeting with me with the physician in chief and just said, hey, Anita's been here a year. You might have seen her at this thing and she has this interest long term. And he's like, oh, I'm starting this finance committee to look at how our revenue cycle and expenses. And I was like, that's what I want to learn about. And so he's like, well, yeah, why don't you come be on that committee? And so people need to know it's an interest because then something might come up that they could tap on you. And then you show your capabilities, then you'll get asked for the next one. So that committee that he put me on, which was early in my time, I happened to be on that committee with the head of radiology, the head of surgery, and the chief nursing officer, and the chief people officer. I didn't know them. They didn't know me, but usually on committees, 10% of the people do 90% of the work. So I happen to be one of those 10% of the people. So I got noticed. And so then the next time the chief of surgery was tasked to look at our faculty recognition program, he was like, hey, Anita, will you come be on that committee? And so then it just starts to build. But I think letting people know you have the interest so that they can try to help you put you in places.
All right, we are going to wrap up the session for today, but please feel free to reach out to any of our leaders and chat with them while they're here for the next few minutes. But wanted to thank you all for taking the time and being here and sharing your experience and insights. And thank you all for coming in and for those that have logged in online virtually. Hopefully you got to learn a lot and really enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And we're looking forward to a lot more conversation and dialogue about, clinicians and leadership and how organizations like ACHE or any of the other professional organizations out there can help build some of those competencies and skills. I do want to invite Mr. Corey here. He is the gracious sponsor for our event today. He's the program director of the University of Houston Clear Lake Healthcare Administration's program and the owner of this beautiful location, and allowed us to use this location for our event. So thank you so much for letting us do that. And if you wanted to just close out with some comments.
I don't own this place, I rent it. But I really am very pleased. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming. We're very proud. We just came here a few months ago and I'm eager to showcase our new home. And it's very good. I just want to tell you our commercial is this. We offer 4 degrees. 2 undergraduate degrees and 2 graduate degrees. MHA and MHA MBA, those are the graduate ones. When we look at the MHA program, we think of it as specialized MBA. It's very focused on healthcare, but that's not what you're probably interested in. The other piece that we do, and it's not published very well, is that we offer programs for physicians. We start in the medical school. We have agreement with UT and UTMB to offer our MBA while the medical students are going to medical school, so that by the time they finish, they'll have both MD, MBA. The other thing we have, is that we started trying to teach the business of healthcare to physicians. And we started with the fellows and residents of the medical schools. And I know with UT, they come here and they rotate. It's an approved rotation and they spend a month And we give them a certificate in healthcare administration. First time it happened, they went back, their chiefs and faculty came to us and said, what about us? We don't want to get an MBA, but we want to learn about the business of healthcare. So we started offering regular classes to physicians, and we went beyond that. And now we're open and available for practicing physicians and so on. There was a lot of discussion about leadership and about economics, finance, and those things. We cover all those things. And we have most of the time the same professors who teach those courses in the regular degree programs cover it. But we also invite other experts from outside to come and cover certain areas because we feel they'll give you more practical experience. So I'm glad you're here, and we're proud of this place. And if you need any advice or help or join any of our programs, we have material over there.
Round of applause for our panelists. And Mr. Puri has some fancy UHCL mugs that he ordered specially for this event. So please make sure you grab one on your way out. And thank you all so much.